The wait is finally over, and the Jammer Lammy NOW arcade machine that's been lost media for over 20 years has finally been found and documented. For the unacquainted, Jammer Lammy is a PaRappa the Rapper spin-off on the PlayStation 1, where you play guitar instead of rapping, and ultimately can unlock and play as PaRappa as well. It was also the first game in the PaRappa series with versus play, and remains the only game in the series to feature cooperative play.
Catch you later, teacher!
People have been searching for the arcade version for a long time now, and neither Namco of Japan nor the developer NanaOn-Sha could find any data for it. Really, not much was known about the arcade version of this game at all, outside of a few tiny photos and clips from the early internet. A manual was found in 2019 by Paper Thin Man, who was kind enough to share pictures of it. Part of the manual described the game modes and started to give us an idea of how it worked, but still, no one had even seen the game in 2 decades, let alone played it. It turns out, back in the mid-2000s, Jonathan Ross bought what is possibly the last surviving Lammy arcade on eBay. I reached out to him in 2019, and we've been trying to coordinate a backup of the arcade data since, but the pandemic in 2020 delayed things until we were finally able to get together this year in 2023.
Beautiful! That place shall go down in history.
To go into an arcade, find this game, and beat that score.
The PlayStation game was released in March of 1999 in Japan, and would come to America and Europe in the fall. The arcade version was created in December and published by Namco along with 3 other guitar games: Aerosmith's Quest for Fame, Guitar Jam, and Million Hits. These machines were referred to collectively as the 4 Guitar Brothers, and were part of Namco's effort to produce a hit music game as quickly as possible, because Konami was dominating Japanese arcades after releasing Beatmania in '97, Dance Dance Revolution in '98, and Guitar Freaks in '99 that same year. Before companies create hundreds of arcade machines, they first place the games on location tests to make sure there will be demand for it. Not much is known about exactly how well Lammy performed on these tests, but given that the game was all but lost to time, it's safe to assume it did not do well. It's also worth mentioning the coin counter on Jonathan's machine reads 3412. This means the machine likely earned 341,000 yen in Japan, which adds up to about $3,000, much less than the price tag for the game itself. Over 100 locations were slated to receive the Lammy arcade, though a notice was later posted to the top of the page asking for players to call the location first before making a trip, implying that many locations never received it. The design of Lammy's cabinet is incredibly unique. Much of the surface is brightly colored blown plastic with lots of rounded surfaces, giving it something of a frog-like toy look. 2 bulbous spheres at the top feature character art of Lammy and Rammy with spinning backgrounds that create a psychedelic effect. Like many Japanese arcades, the cabinet also has fragile side pop panels and a topper. Jonathan's cabinet is missing the right panel, but these side panels explain how to play, and the topper bizarrely advertises Joe Chin's guitar tables instead of the arcade itself. 2 purple fences extend from the front of the machine to support the guitars, and to place them at a fixed distance from the screen. The cabinet is covered in vinyl art featuring Lammy's band, Milk Can, and more Joe Chin advertisements. and the posts that support the guitars are marked with Lammy and Rammy's logos for players 1 and 2. The Namco System 12 arcade unit included hardware similar to PlayStation hardware. System 12 games usually store most of the graphics data in ROM chips on a special daughter board, with the game logic and audio on the main board in the program ROMs and sound ROM. The system also supports an optional CD-ROM interface, but only 3 games use it. The first order of business was to make an ISO of the game disc and then capture a ton of footage. The CD that comes with the game unfortunately didn't contain any logic, but it did have all of the pre-rendered videos, as well as the music and lots of Joe Chin's voice acting, who acts as the announcer for the game. Jonathan has been taking fantastic care of the machine, but it's 24 years old now and is starting to malfunction. So we're coordinating a professional dump of the ROMs, hopefully later this year. So just like the PlayStation version, players can play solo as Lammy or PamiRappa, or play co-op or versus with Lammy against either Rammy or PamiRappa. Different from the PlayStation version is that instead of playing through the whole game or selecting individual stages, you choose from courses of 3 stages each. The easy mode takes you through the first 3 stages, the normal mode takes you through stages 2, 4, and 5, and the hard mode takes you through the final 3 stages. The versus mode here is a best of 3, so battles can end after just 2 stages. Interesting to note here is that in the PlayStation release, for whatever reason, Stage 1 could only be played with Lammy solo, and not PamiRappa or Rammy, even though some unfinished data remains in the game's code for it. But in the arcade version, PamiRappa and Rammy are playable on Stage 1.
I don't want to be banned.
There were also some regional differences between the Japanese and Western PlayStation releases that censored references to hell and deforestation in a few stages, but the arcade version uses a mix of music, subtitles, and graphics from these different versions. The PlayStation version also takes you through stories involving Lammy and PamiRappa that tie the stages together, but the arcade version has none of that plot and instead features Joe Chin, the villain from PamiRappa 1, exploiting Lammy's band and shilling his guitar table invention, which are the controllers on the arcade machine.
I don't think I can live without it.
There's a lot of bizarre lore here in TV commercials and infomercials, and even some things that bridge the gap between Lammy and PamiRappa 2.
Come on now, let's start with a punch. 1, 2, 1, 3.
Yes indeed, that's for sure. The kick punch style remains basic.
On the PlayStation, you play notes with 6 buttons, the 4 face buttons plus L1 and R1. You can bend notes with the L2 and R2 buttons, change guitar effects with Select, and also use the D-pad for a little control over which notes you're playing. The arcade version, however, only supports the 6 note buttons. The 4 face buttons are now flaps in the strum area of the guitar controller. The L1 button is now a sliding Joe switch on the neck, and the R1 button is a ridged, turntable-like chin switch on the bottom of the controller. All the arcade buttons are one-way switches and can't be moved backwards to play notes. The guitar controllers can tilt and rotate a bit on their stands, but can't be picked up. The guitar controller for Lammy is completely unlike the controllers Konami had debuted the same year for Guitar Freaks, or the controllers later used by games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band. And combined with the fact that this game didn't perform well in its public tests, you might expect Joe Chin's guitar table controller to feel obtuse or clunky. But somehow it's not. The Joe neck switch is very intuitive, and while you do have to eventually memorize the order of the flap buttons, these games often reward freestyle play, so it's usually not important if you hit these keys in the wrong order. The only awkward thing about the controller is the chin turntable, but the developers also seem to acknowledge this because this button appears much less frequently in the arcade version.
Actually, I'd be happier if you weren't that good. The game would be over sooner, you know what I mean?
It's a matter of opinion whether the PlayStation or arcade version of the game is superior, as they each have some unique controls and modes. But all of the PamiRappa games are incredibly short, which I think works much better in an arcade format. The guitar controller actually feels great and is a lot of fun to learn and use. The cabinet itself also has a lot of fine details and care put into it. The sounds you make also only play on the side of the arcade you're standing on, so it sounds like the music that each player is making is actually coming out of their guitar. The guitar controller adds a lot to the game, and the developers at NanaOn-Sha seem to agree. So as you've seen, I have an ISO of the arcade CD and hours of footage, as well as large pictures of the boards, the cabinet, and its art. I'm releasing the ripped video and audio along with my footage in a few more videos to come, and then after that I'll release the ISO and pictures to game preservation sites. You won't have to wait long for all of that, but pretty much everything there will already have been seen in my video series. Subscribe to the channel to be first in line to get these videos as they release, or follow me on Twitter at EricYagi.